Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. All of it brought to you by Hopsy. To get the sub-home draft machine, 2 mini kegs of beer, 2 Hopsy glasses, and free membership in the monthly beer club for just $99. Go to tryhopsy.com/martini and use the promo code Martini. Terms and conditions apply. Much more on that in just a moment. We want to thank Alexander DeSanctis for filling in for Jim yesterday, and we want to inform our listeners he was not brooding over the fact that, once again, the Patriots are in the Super Bowl. He was actually out spending time with his family on a holiday. So, Jim, welcome back.
Yeah, I mean, if I did that, I'd never do the podcast, Greg.
Boston fans, on some level, we certainly are impressed. It's just really deep down somewhere. Anyway, here we go with our good martini. Lost in a lot of other news this weekend, Jim. Not only football, but what happened on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and the BuzzFeed story. Buried in there was a nationally televised speech that the president gave to the United States of America that most people, I think, have forgotten about here. And the president is looking to end the shutdown, but he's also looking to get money for his border wall. And to do that, he has essentially extended an offer of 3-year extension for DACA recipients and extends protections for 300,000 recipients of what's known as the Temporary Protected Status Program, which protects immigrants from designated countries with conditions that prevent nationals from returning safely, reports Fox News. We also want to mention that he has talked about hundreds of millions of dollars for dealing with the humanitarian crisis at the border, but he says he's got to have the money to put in border security, put up the border wall in strategic locations, and that will get the government reopened fully. The Democrats saying that this is not going to happen. Their line here, Jim, is, hey, we're happy to talk about all of this just as soon as you open up the government. And the ones who are talking about the actual offer say that that's still a non-starter. So did Trump gain the upper hand here, PR-wise, looking like the guy who actually wants to solve something, or no?
Yeah, I think he did, because one of the interesting things I noticed this morning was the editorial board of USA Today. Certainly not a bunch of Trump fans. I don't think you can say they're a bunch of right-wing extremists. Had a very, a pox on both your houses tone to their editorial about the shutdown today. And you might say, oh, Jim, that's not good. But remember, Trump said, blame me for the shutdown heading into this, that this was turning to very, familiar, darn those extremist Republicans, look at how unreasonable they are, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's both sides are being unreasonable, which is moving the ball in a different direction than a couple of weeks ago. I think it's interesting here. You can pretty much see why every Democrat would say, of course I'm not taking this deal. You give me a temporary extension for the DACA kids. You give me a temporary extension on TPS, even though the T in TPS is for temporary, isn't it, Craig?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure I read that on the cover sheet to the facts for TPS reports. My congratulations to both listeners who got that reference. So here's the situation. They say, all right, so look, we want something more permanent, particularly for the DACA kids. Now, this is where you'd traditionally expect Democrats to say, we appreciate the president's offer, but reject it. However, you come up with the counteroffer. Give us permanent extensions for the DACA kids, and then we can talk about wall funding. Democrats really seem to think they're going to get this shutdown to end without funding any border fencing or wall funding or slats or whatever we're calling it these days. You only take that position when you're totally convinced that the media is going to have your back and always going to cover for you, and never suggest that you're the one being unreasonable here. I think it does the president good to put offers on the table. That struck me as, if not a reasonable offer, then certainly we're getting close to a reasonable offer. And it's now on the Democrats to put their counteroffer onto the table. Pelosi said this week the House will be voting regular appropriations bills and attempting to nudge ones that, Mitch McConnell has said are not going to pass the Senate. The votes aren't there. The president's not going to sign it. We all, Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats will go through the motions of offering proposals that they know are going to be rejected. When do the Democrats get responsible for this? And it's really kind of interesting that you're starting to see, obviously you've seen, the building reports of federal workers who are either working without pay. Apparently 1 out of every 10 TSA agents was out this weekend. I have to fly at the end of the week. I'm really hoping they can wrap this up in 2 or 3 days, Greg, but I'm not expecting it. Everybody recognizes, okay, this situation is untenable. I do think there is a building pressure on Democrats. I'd be very curious if you loaded up every House Democrat and every Senate Democrat with truth serum, how many of them would say, oh, I think Pelosi's got this. Trump's going to, break any day now. My suspicion is not. If Trump was, if bad media pressure was going to get Trump to fold on the wall, it would have happened by now. And now, obviously, there's a need for somebody to put some sort of bigger movement on the table. It's kind of interesting that they said that USA Today offered a temporary deal to reopen the government that would put non-wall funding and a temporary extension for the DACA kids. And then you begin to work on a permanent extension for the DACA kids and include wall fence funding in that one. When USA Today editors are trying to outline their idea of a deal, I think it's a sign that this is not as one-sided as the Democrats were hoping this shutdown fight was going to be.
Exactly. And the counterpoint is already there for the Democrats' argument of let's just get the government fully open again and then we'll talk. Trump specifically asked that to Nancy Pelosi after his primetime speech a couple of weeks ago, whenever that was. And he says, OK, let's say we reopen the government. Then would you be OK with billions for the wall? No. And that was his bye-bye moment when he walked out of the meeting. So the Democrats are making it sound like they're the reasonable ones here, but it's clear what their intentions are.
Pelosi's stance is to basically wait for the president to fold. And you'd like to think that after a month, they begin to realize it's not just going to happen. like maybe the reaction of the early 2018 shutdown, the fact that Trump had signed previous omnibus spending bills that didn't include wall funding. Look, Trump knows he needs this before 2020, and he's got to get some significant amount of funding for this. You give him this, you can get the government reopened, and you can get something else you want, i.e. the DACA stuff or the TPS stuff. The deal is there if they want to pursue it, but I think the Nancy Pelosi thinks she's just going to keep racking up victories in this shutdown. But I don't think it's the same problem we have with every single government shutdown, Greg. Each side is convinced, oh, no, we will convince the public that they're to blame. And, we'll get good press at it. And what happens is everybody comes out looking stupid. Everybody comes out looking like stubborn and childish and incapable of reaching a compromise. Everybody's image takes a hit from this. And they never seem to learn, Greg.
In the meantime, if you need a drink as this all plays out, Hopsy is definitely the way to go. And this episode of 3 Martini Lunch, as we mentioned at the beginning, is sponsored by Hopsy. Everybody knows that the only way to get beer at its very best is straight from the tap. And Hopsy brings beer on tap to the comfort of your own home, but without the price tag that many beer drinkers have come to expect. Have your own beer bar at home with the Sub, a countertop appliance that fits neatly in your kitchen, bar, or living room.
Think of Hopsy as the Nespresso for beer or a Keurig for beer. Whether you're a hop head, a malt mouth, or a palate partier, you can enjoy a variety of beer styles from big and small breweries, which rotates monthly. Their IPAs are very popular. Hopsy partners with a long list of breweries and ships mini kegs to your home or office. Now, people may know that not only there are many wonderful sponsors to this podcast, but this is one in which I am not merely touting their products. I am a customer, and in fact, having enjoyed their product quite a bit over the holidays, Greg, I decided, all right, January 1st, New Year's resolution, I'm going to cut back. And then I had 2 mini kegs, which are basically the equivalent of 2 6-packs of beer, have arrived since then. And they're taunting me, Greg. They're sitting there on the kitchen counter saying, you want to load us up. We'll be nice and cold. We'll be fresh. You figured out how to get it to pour without a giant head on the pint. It's tough to resist. That's the only downside is this is a really excellent flavor selection, comes fresh, tastes great. It's not too much. It's not big and heavy like a giant keg or something like that. I probably should take this off the kitchen counter. And it's not it's sizable, but it's not overwhelming. It's not going to eat up take up a huge chunk of your kitchen. But no, I leave it out there to tempt me every single day, just to show how off my willpower. So let me tell you, I've decided to go January, Greg, and come February, I am digging into my Hopsies. So file it away. If I sound a little less, my judgment seems less sober than usual in early February, Greg, that's why.
Do you tip your bartender? How does that work?
Only if the service is good.
So to get the Sub home draft machine, 2 mini kegs of beer, equivalent to 2 6-packs, 2 Hopsy glasses, and free membership in the monthly beer club for $99, go to tryhopsy.com/martini and use the promo code Martini. Terms and conditions apply. That's spelled TRYHOPSY HOPSY.com/martini, promo code martini. All right, Jim, let's move to our bad martini now. And we are getting into late January, which means more and more Democrats are going to have to make up their mind about whether they're running in 2020. Kamala Harris made it official yesterday. We know Gillibrand's in and Biden's about to make his decision. We think he's going to run. Other folks have gotten in, Julian Castro, Tulsi Gabbard, on and on and on. It's going to be a big field. But the bad news here is not that all these people with terrible ideas are planning to run for president, which is bad, but the ones who have actually taken positions which might have been a little bit contrary to liberal knee-jerk orthodoxy over the last couple of decades are now just groveling to the liberal base about how they're so sorry that they made these horrible mistakes of actually thinking for themselves on some other issues. Joe Biden is the latest. Yesterday, he was at an event in Washington commemorating Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and he was very sad about how he was tough on sentencing for crack cocaine users compared to powder cocaine users. He, quote, "I haven't always been right. I know we haven't always gotten things right, but I've always tried. It was a big mistake when it was made. We were told by the experts that crack, you never go back, and that the two were somehow fundamentally different. It's not different, but it's trapped an entire generation." And, Jim, that's a fairly complicated issue. It's been addressed to some extent now in this new criminal justice reform bill. A lot of folks seeing some sentence disparities that probably shouldn't have been in place there. It's a bit of a debatable issue. But while Joe Biden wrestles with that and whether to officially get into this race, the undisputed queen so far of backtracking and flip-flopping and apologizing is Kirsten Gillibrand, the New York senator, who before she replaced Hillary Clinton in the Senate represented a fairly moderate district in upstate New York. But now on issues of immigration and guns and all sorts of other things, she's saying she was so wrong. Hat tip to the guys at Free Beacon here with the I'm Sorry soundtrack and all of Kirsten Gillibrand saying how wrong she was.
I came from a district that was 98% white. We have immigrants, but not a lot of immigrants. I really regretted that I didn't look beyond my district. I did not think about suffering in other people's lives. I was not caring about others.
When you were representing a district in Congress, you had an A+ rating from them. Were they engaged in all of that bad stuff back then?
They sure were, and now I have an F rating.
Can you understand President Trump's position on immigration since you were there?
No, I think his positions are racist.
Your critics will say it's political opportunism.
As is their right. They can say what they like.
Yeah, we're going to say it because it's absolutely true.
Because it's accurate. It's interesting. I remember reading this glowing profile of Kirsten Gillibrand from Vogue magazine last year. It was 2017 at this point. And they talked about how, she's a progressive, but she's the kind of person who can, the kind of candidate who can win in a deep red district. Look at how she was in the House. Yeah, because all her positions were different. It's a lot easier to win those red districts when you're pro-gun and anti-illegal immigration and all these other issues that were just not the stances of her party. That's the secret. It's not fast. It's not some amazing rhetoric or something like that. She totally flip-flopped, and she totally flip-flopped the moment she became the appointed replacement senator for Hillary Clinton and was representing New York State statewide. That's, there's no mystery there. Shifting over to Biden, which I thought was kind of perhaps a more interesting one, wrote about him last week, noted that, not only was he the big co-sponsor and, in fact, maybe one of the driving forces between the Crime Control Act of the mid-'80s, there was a point where he was bragging about how much he had expanded the death penalty for federal crimes, denying parole, tough 5-year sentence for having a crack cocaine the size of a quarter. I mean, Joe Biden was eager to show he was as tougher on crime than all the Republicans were. Now, there's a part of me that says, just for sheer, this is just not where the Democratic Party is. And it's also worth saying, look, a lot of people have changed their thinking on this. With crime levels have changed. People look at these things differently. There's a question, criminal justice reform, and I think, prison anti-recidivism. You send somebody to prison, do you want them to constantly be in a revolving door and constantly going back to prison? Lots of folks all across the aisle have said this, but the problem is that Joe Biden is now saying, hey, remember the biggest thing I did in the Senate? Sorry about that. That was wrong. Which is tough to be. Even by Joe Biden standards, that's a tough spot to be in. And I think it's very likely his rivals to begin a big issue on this. And again, I also kind of wonder, as much as I appreciate many aspects of this efforts towards criminal justice reform and trying to make sure that people's first run-in with the law turns out to be their last, look, a lot of these things, crime did come down fairly significantly from the 1990s. And there's a lot of arguments about why this is, different policing strategies. Some would say the broken windows theory by Giuliani and Bratton up in New York City. Look, simple as saying it really reflects birth rates and various other environmental factors. Crack cocaine gradually phased out. We can debate exactly what these factors were, but I have a very hard time believing that the quote-unquote tough-on-crime approaches that became popular in the 1980s had zero effect on the lowering of crime rates over those years. And so as much as you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and to see Democrats just so explicitly renouncing everything they used to stand for in criminal justice, I think it's it's going to be probably one of the most interesting aspects of the debate for this, because as apparently nobody wants to remain and stand being, hey, I still believe in getting tough on criminals. And one of the great ironies, of course, is that, with Kamala Harris in there, Greg, and if Amy Klobuchar goes in there, there are going to be a bunch of former prosecutors out there. And it'll be interesting to see how quickly they run away from their past prosecutions for drug offenses and things like that.
Fascinating. Do you think the mea culpas are going to work? Because we seem to be in this absolute purity, and the people with the shorter track record, obviously, are going to be having fewer things that they're apologizing for and trying to explain away. So is this going to, even with all the apologies, is this going to hurt these people who have been around for a while?
My guess is it certainly gives a couple of jab lines in a debate or something like that. I don't know if you're going to vote against Joe Biden because of some vote he took in the 1980s or positions he had in the 1980s. But the flip side might be, your bigger problem might be that Joe Biden was casting votes in the 1980s.
Right.
And a sense that it's time for some new blood somewhere.
Well, let's get to our crazy martini now. And we've talked a lot about the Democratic presidential primary for 2020. But what if there's a Republican presidential primary? Let's go to Politico. Republican Governor Larry Hogan is acting a lot like a guy who wants to run against Donald Trump in 2020, and the president's re-election team is taking notice. The second-term Maryland governor has been implicitly going after Trump in speeches, meeting with never-Trump Republicans, and planning a March trip to Iowa as vice chair of the National Governors Association. It's all fueling speculation that Hogan, a 62-year-old cancer survivor who coasted to re-election in liberal Maryland and remains one of the most popular governors in the country, is open to the prospect of a long-shot primary challenge to the incumbent president. His flirtation comes at a time when Trump is facing increasing blowback over his handling of the protracted government shutdown and bracing for a potentially devastating report by special counsel Robert Mueller. Hogan used his inaugural address on Wednesday to repudiate the debilitating politics of Washington and to raise the specter of impeachment. He recalled how his father, former Congressman Lawrence Hogan, was the first Republican congressman to support the removal of Richard Nixon. The governor did not utter Trump's name, but the implication was clear. The White House is paying close attention. The president's political aides have been monitoring the Maryland governor for months, and several said they regarded the inauguration speech as an unmistakable act of aggression. So, Jim, what do you think of the idea of a Larry Hogan primary run here? Smart, stupid? What do you think?
I'd hate to call it stupid. Let's just say unwise. And I say this as a guy who's a pretty big fan of Larry Hogan. As a Virginia resident, I seethe with frustration that Maryland has a more conservative governor than I do here in the state of Virginia. I wrote a profile of Larry Hogan, and I think it's worth noting, I don't think you can say that Larry Hogan is a brilliant conservative reformer. And I'm trying to be very mild in my criticism. I describe him as a hockey goalie. He stops bad ideas from getting enacted, the bad ideas that are generally coming from the Democratic state legislature. He still has a very heavily Democratic state legislature. He is doing what he can from the governor's position to move Maryland. Some might argue a more conservative direction. I think you could probably reasonably argue a more centrist direction. This is not he's not enacting sweeping cuts in spending or anything like that. I don't say this necessarily as a criticism. He's doing what is possible within the Overton window of Maryland state politics. If you run, there is barring President Trump keeling over from a heart attack, God forbid, there's about a 99% chance he'll be the Republican nominee in 2020. Maybe the Mueller report comes out and shows something really glaring and, leads to impeachment and really damages the president. But in all likelihood, if you run against Trump and you're going to end up having a running mostly symbolic, a protest vote. And I don't think that really is. I wonder if that's what Larry Hogan really wants to be remembered for. I'm not really sure what that gets you. The other thing also, I have this nagging frustration is that if Trump gets a primary challenge, that creates an excuse for him if he loses in 2020. And to me, Trumpism for 2020, look, in 2016, it was Trump against Hillary Clinton. And there were a whole bunch of Americans who may not have loved Trump, may have had real issues with his character, may have had doubts about him, may have not trusted him. But they said, you know what? I know what I'm getting with Hillary Clinton. I need to see a change. I'll roll the dice on Trump. 2020 will be the first time Trump goes before the voters as not a possibility, but with an actual record that the voters are going to scrutinize. And there's some good parts of that record, and there's some not so good parts of that record. If Trump gets a primary challenge, and he loses, the explicitly, well, I could have won if it hadn't been for having to fight that primary and, the attacks from the right and the left. It's kind of those things like, I want to see Trumpism on the ballot in 2020, and I want to see it rise or fall on its own merits. I don't want to give Trumpists any, excuses to point to afterwards or something like that. By the way, also, again, I don't think Hogan would get more than 10, 15%. We'll see how he does in some of these early states. But I think if you're Larry Hogan, first of all, you just got reelected, and people, the people of Maryland probably expected him to focus on being a governor. And then the second thing is that, again, I don't, as much as I like him more than John Kasich and Jeff Flake, I don't really see any reason to expect why he would have any more success than either one of them, other than having a better record as governor, more freshly in the minds of people. But again, this is it's a way to go from a popular governor who's popular across the country to being a governor who'd be very unpopular amongst a whole bunch of Republicans. And look, he's not that old a guy. If he really wants to run for president, have presumably a better option in 2024 or 2028.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, you mentioned Flake and CNN contributor, former Ohio Governor John Kasich. They're waiting in the wings possibly as well, either as primary opponents or even independent candidates. So more intrigue to come, they say.
Just so much downside, so little upside. Why would you do that to yourself?
Yes, exactly. And just want to close on this note. It's really becoming known last night and this morning. Fox News Channel special report anchor Brett Baer and his family were skiing out in Montana. On the drive back to the airport, they're involved in a serious wreck. Car flipped over. All of them were hospitalized. The good news is they're out of the hospital now, and everybody's expected to make a full recovery. So get well wishes to one of the really decent, good journalists here in Washington, one of the best people you'll find in this town, and for all of his family.
Amen, Greg. Good guy, good family. Hate to see it happen, but hopefully it looks like it'll be a long-term okay ending to what must have been a terrifying moment.
Absolutely. Man. All right. On that note, Jim, you and I will reconvene tomorrow. And just a reminder to visit our good friends over at Hopsy. Try Hopsy.com/martini. And tune in again Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.